starte ich einfach mal die Aufzeichnung schon. So, also herzlich willkommen zur Vorlesung Differentielle Psychologie, heute mit dem Special Guest Kevin McGrew. Es gibt natürlich halt eben technische Probleme, aber nichtsdestotrotz hoffe ich, dass er jetzt halt eben gleich loslegen kann und die einleitenden Worte kann ich dann vielleicht schon mal sprechen. Ich gucke mal, ob er hier im Chat schon wieder dabei ist.
Grüßt derweil auch noch meine Studierenden, die hoffentlich sich auch eifrig zugeschaltet haben.
Ja, du kannst auch gerne deine
Studierenden. RWTH, genau. Schön. Also ich freue mich riesig, dass Nikolaus uns eingeladen hat und wir heute dabei sein können. Er hat gerade schon mal, bevor das Video angegangen ist, gesagt, Kevin McGrew, das war so das Paper, das man gelesen hat, Ende der 2000er Jahre. Und dann hat das so alles auf den Kopf gestellt, was Intelligenzforschung anging.
Ja, also oder viele Stränge halt eben so zusammengefasst, wo ich mir halt eben unklar war, wie es halt zueinander verhält. Und das war nochmal so ein super schönes Big Picture halt in diesem Paper. Und gut, ich meine, Kevin McGrew kennt halt eben seine eigene Vita, deswegen kann ich die, wenn er noch nicht da ist, nochmal zum Besten geben, ist halt Direktor vom Institute of Applied Psychometrics. Das scheint eine nicht-universitäre Organisation zu sein, hat aber studiert Psychologie an der Minnesota State University, dort Master's Degree gemacht, dann war er an der Universität Minnesota, hat da sein Doctoral Degree in Educational Psychology gemacht und dann auch 12 Jahre als School Psychologist gearbeitet, was ganz interessant ist, also weil der da nicht aus grauer Theorie erzählt, sondern wirklich auch praktische Erfahrung hat. There he is again. I just switched to German because I thought when you're not here, we don't have to talk in English, but now I'm switching back to English again. I just went through your CV, which we can find at the IAP homepage. And we're at this point that you're practicing school, or that you were a practicing school psychologist for 12 years, and that's great because it's someone who doesn't only speak from his university expertise but also has a practical expertise. This is always something very helpful. And then you were 10 years professor of applied psychology at St. Cloud State University, and now you're a research professor at the Institute for Community Integration at the University of Minnesota. And we already started and by talking how we met and this was the thing, Kevin needed this manual for the Wechsler Intelligence Test, also Hamburg Wechsler Intelligenztest für Kinder, and I sent it to him. And he asked if there's anything I can do, please ask me. And this is what I did. I said, it would be great if you could be here and tell my students something about your research. And Kevin instantly said, cool, I'm gonna come and I'm gonna talk something. And it's really great to have you here. So this is the point where I would give the microphone, the virtual microphone to you. And enjoy the show.
Okay, hope our connection stays a little more stable than it was there.
Yeah.
So what I'll do is, I appreciate being here. It was very serendipitous how we kind of got connected and such. But it's really kind of cool, I think. What I'm going to do is I'll share my screen, and we talked it over, Nicholas and I, and I'm going to do a kind of an intro to kind of like where do the factor theories come from and where CHC theory is. And I sent ahead the chapter, and I think it's a waste of our time for me to kind of go through every one of those abilities and define them. It's actually boring for me to do also. And I hope you guys, your English is okay. Because I don't speak German, I will be sending copies of all my PowerPoints to Nicholas via a link for downloading after, so you can look at them more slowly, and talk about them, and look at the ones that a lot of slides I'm not going to present. So I would suggest you just sit back and listen more than anything. And eventually there'll be a point we'll do a question and answer. So, but I got the presentation into two different modules. One is factor theory, is, in a brief kind of like history thing, why we ended up where we're at and what CAC kind of is right now. And then we'll open up the questions on any questions you have about the CAC model. But then I would prefer to spend time, since this is stuff that nobody has, or it's only shared kind of informally, where things are going, and and show you some new exciting research that I've been doing with Joel Schneider and Olkan Boulet and Scott Decker, kind of like where I think intelligence testing and intelligence research is going to go. So I think that's more important. So with that, if that makes sense, I'll share my screen here to make sure that works. Host disabled participant screen sharing.
Nicholas, I have to allow you. Yeah.
Yeah, I have to allow you. Wait a second. So I have to stop my screen sharing, but so there. There you go. You should be able now.
Okay, good. Yeah, and I was right in the middle of reviewing slides when I got your note that we needed to start. So let me back them up here. So do you see that first slide?
Yep.
Am I also in the corner?
Yep.
Good, good. I hate it when you watch PowerPoint and you can't see the person.
Yep.
And if you want to find out a lot of more information about what I do and what I've done and published, you can go to this web page. You don't have to write it down. It'll be in the slides I send to you, because I put everything I can on the internet. One reason is so I don't have to keep my brain full of stuff. I can always go find it here myself. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, and if there's a long story about why my Twitter handle is at IQ Mobile. It was a mistake when I signed up, but I'm keeping it. So I'm semi-active on Twitter, and I follow a lot of people on Twitter that do intelligence research and related things. So, and I usually follow back people who follow me that are in the same area. So if you want to do that, I'd be more than happy to follow back.
K-Dizzle is a great name. K-Dizzle is a great name. I was.
You know where that comes? You know where that comes from?
From Snoop Dogg, I think.
Snoop Dogg.
Yeah, we know Snoop Dogg in Germany also.
Yeah,
Matthias and I are really great fans of 92 gangster rap.
Well, I have a stepson who started calling me K-Dizzle, and it stuck. That's how, not a lot of, unless you know about Snoop Dogg, not too many people know what K-Dizzle means. So yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I really enjoy your Twitter.
K-Dizzle is the rizzle for the shizzle.
Yeah. We're going to waste a lot of time here if we keep on going. And my other nickname is IQ McGrew, and there's a big story behind that. And it's in my days as a school psychologist. But yeah, K-Dizzle. You can call me that. I don't care. But anyway, let's just start with, and this is kind of a thrown together presentation of a bunch of different presentations. So I put them together, mashed them together. And let's just start with some agreed upon facts, because this is going to lead you somewhere where I want to go. But intelligence originates in the brain. We all know that. And the brain is a complex dynamic network system. That's what research has shown us. And I think it's really displayed well in that first figure at the top. Things are just firing. And, we got these other animations that through network, fMRI work and other kinds of brain scan kind of work, we've established over in the last 20 years that the brain basically is a rich connection of significant hubs. In fact, they call some of these the Rich Club network. And this is an article by Bresler and Menon, that you have to think about the brain as everything's working kind of, and there's all this connection going on, and different hubs are connected to other hubs, and different parts of the network are connected to different parts of the hubs, and the white gray matter underneath is all connective tissue and such. So we know the brain kind of functions as a system of networks, interconnected networks. Well, what I want to just throw at you is a quiz. So if we think about the brain as a dynamic, complex network of systems, I want you, without thinking too hard, draw a line in your mind from this dot that represents this to which of these figures best represents the above. Does anybody want to? I'm trying to trap you or lead you somewhere. Which one do you think?
Can give this to the chat also. So
Yeah,
if you have an idea,
yeah.
just post it in the chat, ABC.
Ja, the students can post in the chat. Also liebe Studierende, wenn Sie im Chat schreiben wollen, oben das Bild, was entspricht am ehesten dem Modell A, B oder C. Sie müssen nur raten. I just asked them to, yeah, they are all posting C.
Yep, that's what I want. That's what I want. This is something I'm trying out for a new presentation because we're trying to change the thinking about how intelligence should be represented. And A and B are what we're going to talk about first, because that's what we've been doing for the last 100 years, trying to understand the structure, nature of intelligence. C is where, but not a lot of people are there right now. And I'll get that, and C is kind of the second presentation, which is, I think, the most exciting. So let's go, where this comes from, and I can always send these articles if you want me to. This is an article by Savvy, Mossman, and Vandermoss, that in terms of factor analysis, there have been three major models, and I'll explain them briefly later. But the 20th century, this comes from their article, Theory Formation and Human Intelligence, has been dominated by factor analysis theories. It's done an excellent job. It's been the workhorse of trying to understand what the major dimensions of intelligence are. But what network theories will dominate the 21st century. And this is how they look. And you may have seen some of these in articles recently. It's primarily a very hot topic in the area of psychopathology and mental illness, and especially the group out of the Netherlands. They're doing a lot of good stuff in this area. But this is where I'm going with my research. And but let's get back to where I think factor analysis has taken us to a certain point, and we're at that point where it's really not going to help us do much more. But basically, and I'm not sure, what your background and what you've taught the students yet, but whenever we have an intercorrelation matrix of variables or a cognitive test, the matrix is positive definite. That means the correlations are all significant and positive. The well-known finding. When you take a positive definite matrix, factor analysis helps us underlie the dimensionality of the data. So we use factor analysis, which is a statistical procedure, to identify the major dimensions. And we've had well over 100 years of research of doing this since the early days of Spearman, when he developed a more informal method. And this was a conference back in 2004, which was 18 years ago. It said, where are we after 100 years? So it's over 100 plus years that we've been factor analyzing cognitive data. And before I get to that, where what that shows us, I want to give you a real big picture. I don't know if you've seen this one. If you go to KDizzle at IQ Mobile, this is the tweet I have posted or pegged or pinned. I like to make sure that people understand that human intelligence research actually, for people who really get into just the testing part and who are psychologists or clinical psychologists, tend to pay attention mostly to factor analysis. But Earl Hunt had an excellent book on intelligence in 2011. And he had this excellent hierarchy of levels of theoretical reductionism and explanation of intelligence that have different levels of research. And we need to pay attention to these other ones. And that's where I've been digging for the last 20 years. At the bottom is research that's looking at neural efficiency, that's trying to get at what is the biological entity that causes intelligence. This is kind of the search for Spearman's mental energy. And there's been a lot of things proposed, rate of neural oscillations, reaction time, evoked response potentials. The two most recent candidates or mitochondrial functioning, which is shown by this nifty GIF over here, or GIF, whatever, you know, which are energy cell pumps in every cell we have in our body. David Geary has proposed a very interesting theory that might be the essence of G, for general intelligence. But there's been a ton of researchers and people who have responded in a series of articles in different journals, raising all kinds of questions about it. The other one's the von Economou neuron. That just came out last year or 2 years ago, and nobody seems to be paying much attention to that. But this is research where people are trying to find what is the biological mechanism that Spearman was talking about. Can we ever find what that is? And basically, after 100 years of research, we don't know yet. The next level of research is brain function and network research, which is where a lot of progress has been made in the last 10, 20 years, especially with the human connectome, stuff about functional brain networks. I mentioned Bresler and Menon there, the rich club networks, and the parietal frontal integration theory model of intelligence of Hare and Coulomb and Jung, which I think is very good. And then above that, actually Earl Hunt only had 3 levels. I broke it into 4. Is we have information processing or mechanical models where we use metaphors of machines and such to try to understand intelligence. And the most common is information processing with working memory, perception, working memory, acquired knowledge and such. And at the top of the hierarchy are measurable cognitive behaviors, which are psychometric models. And that is where all the factor analysis research has been working and been focusing on, with very, very little integration of anything down here. Some of us are trying to make changes to that, and there's some really good scholars. I don't have time to talk about them who have done stuff, especially in the brain network area. So what I'm going to explain first is the overview of what we know about the measurable cognitive behaviors. What have we learned about some psychometric factor analysis models, and where are we? And just kind of give you a brief background. And some of this might be a repetition for you, but it always helps. So we started with Spearman in 1906 with the 2-factor theory that squares are tests. These are specific abilities, and then there was a general factor above causing all the test performances. Thurston, then the American model, the American psychologists came along with, no, there is no such thing as G. We just have all these primary mental abilities, and they're all correlated. This thing is not a linear presentation, it's a conceptual presentation. 1941, Cattell, a student of Spearman, said, no, there's really no one G, there's kind of 2 general Gs, GF, fluid, and GC. And I think there's some merit to this model that we've tended to have forgotten about over time, and some of us are trying to bring it back a little bit. Cattell's student, Horn, extended it with the model with Cattell's and found that they're up to 7 to 8, 9 broad abilities. And don't worry about the acronyms, they're old and historic. And it was called Horn Extended GFGC theory. Some of this might be reviewed, but that's okay. And then Carroll did his massive meta-analysis, basically what it was, where he reviewed the world's literature and came up and said, this is what I found. And he found these broad abilities. And you know what? Horn's model and Cattell's model is very similar, although they got different labels here. He said Carroll said, this is the model that fits the best to what I found, but he put the G back on top. So in 1997, I tried, because I just needed to do it for a chapter, integrated the 2, said they're so similar, and I had the opportunity, and we can talk about this informally during Q&A if you want, so having worked with John Horn and John Carroll on the Woodcock-Johnson revised battery, basically got to work with these 2 great minds, knew there are 2 theories, and said, we got to put them together for practical reasons. And then I wrote a chapter in 1997 where we did that. In 2009, that's the one Nicholas was talking about, where it kind of became more formal and widespread with an article in Intelligence. And then since then, I wrote another chapter in 2005. And Joel Schneider joined me in 2012 and 2018 to provide updates to what's called CHC theory. Fortunately or unfortunately, now we are considered the gatekeepers of CHC theory, although we're just trying to extend it. People are really deserve all the credit, are Carroll, Horn, and Cattell. So Most of the way we do, and this is just to get to some background, so you know where I'm going in the second presentation. Most of the factor analysis models try to explain common or shared variance amongst tests, like tests from the Wechsler scales. And there are three types. And so if these rectangles here are tests, we use factor analysis, and factor analysis is identified, 3, 6, 7, 8, 9. I don't know, anywhere from 8, 9, 10 primary mental abilities. And there's a G at the top when you talk about the G, what I call G plus CHC Carroll model. You'll also see in the literature people analyzing sometimes the same data where they have a hierarchical, a bifactor model where G goes directly to the tests and the primary abilities are what's left over after G is taken into account. So the big difference here is, here we first start with factor analysis extracts these, and it puts the G over top to explain the correlation between the factors. This starts and says, no, G goes to all the tests, and anything that's left over are the factors, or the primary abilities. So there's two different types of research going on there, and they give you somewhat different findings. And then there's the CHC correlated first order non-G model of John Horn, which for some reason has fallen, nobody really paid attention to, but I think it should make a comeback. And you'll see why when I get to the second presentation, that I think John Horn may have been more right than John Carroll was and Arthur Jensen was about G. And it's a long explanation and a long paper I'm working on with my colleagues. So this was the article, if you want to read it, about where the CHC taxonomy was put together, and we kind of call it CHC intelligence in 2009. And just so you know that it's just not me, I missed the one that said that this seems to be a consensus model. Let's put them together. But then other people said the same thing. Ackerman and Lohman in 2006. This is the most validated model we have. These are illustrative quotes, so you know it's just not Kevin McGrew saying so. Richard Snow, he says, unfortunately, he died early because of pancreatic cancer. It defines the taxonomy of cognitive differential psychology for years to come. John Horn himself, when he was still alive, said this is like Mendelev's first presentation of the periodic table of elements in chemistry. So that Carroll's work is just massive, was so important. Even Arthur Jensen said this is a magnum opus. It's the descriptive, psychometric descriptive taxonomy of human cognitive abilities and be the key reference point for now and into the future. So the CHC model is considered by most. There are a few other presented alternative perception models, but considered the consensus taxonomy. And I think the analogy people have used it, it's like, and so I've actually put together a periodic, oops, I got a message, our thing was unstable, but I still hope you're there.
We can hear you.
We can see you. Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
well, okay, good. I actually put together a periodic table of CHC cognitive elements. Here are the broad factors down here. Here are the narrow abilities underneath them all. And they're categorized according to some other broader dimensions. And I used to publish this as a laminated thing I'd hand out to people at presentations, and on the backside were the definitions. And you can download this from my blog if you can find it. If not, let me know. I've made the image available so you can print it and laminate it if you want. So this is like taking the CHC analogy of the taxonomy as a periodic table, literally. And some people find this useful. So what I want to emphasize now before we go a little farther is that I've been talking about the factor analysis research. We've had over 100 years of it with different models. That is basically structural, what it's frequently called, when you talk about types of validity evidence, structural validity evidence. A lot of people don't recognize or realize that CHC model also takes into account neurocognitive evidence, developmental evidence, heritability evidence, and achievement evidence. So you'll frequently hear the criticism, well, that's just a factor analysis taxonomy. It doesn't do us any good. It's just the output of factor analysis. And that's false. This stuff comes from John Horn, who spent a lot of time saying, there's other types of evidence to support these major abilities. And I'm only going to briefly give you what they are. Of course, the structural, the factor analysis is kind of converged on the CHC taxonomy. There's developmental, and this is just a figure. Ignore some of the acronyms there because they're old ones that John Horn used to be, that most of the CHC abilities show different trajectories of growth, which means they are separate, they're different types of abilities. Problem with factor analysis is it can only analyze the correlations, but you have to look outside of factor analysis for other evidence that these abilities are distinct abilities. And developmental evidence shows that. Neurocognitive evidence is showing, especially in the last 10 to 20 years, that different CHC abilities, or GFGC abilities, some people still call them that, are related to different brain network areas. And the brain network people finally got their act together about 15 years ago and started including good markers of GHC or GFGC constructs, and then looked at the relationship with brain networks. So the neurocognitive evidence also suggests that different brain network and hubs and connections are related differentially to different CHC abilities, which also gives evidence that these things are real abilities related to different brain networks. And there's heritability evidence that people different CHC abilities have different heritabilities. And there was just a really powerful study that came out in the last year that really made this point extremely strongly. That different CHC abilities have more heritability than others. The final form is achievement outcome validity evidence. And I just put copies of 2 articles that I've done, but there's a lot of this stuff out there. That do these CHC abilities predict achievement or work outcomes or other outcomes differentially, which means that they are different things. And it's typical in some of the research that I've done. Oops. I shouldn't have touched my screen. I was going to pinch it there. These ran multiple regression models with CHC ability measures and relate them to reading and to math. And these are just examples that show that GF, and anything above this line is significant. This is a mild effect. This is a moderate effect. You can see that GF, GC, even GA and GWM relate to basic reading skills, but they relate in different patterns. And the same thing with math skills over here. So collectively, structural research is only one thing. It's been the driving force behind identifying these possible abilities. But heritability evidence, neurocognitive evidence, achievement outcome evidence, and developmental evidence supports that these broad abilities do exist. And it's my understanding from my reading that they relate to different networks in the brain. So with that in mind, you've got a copy of this chapter from Joel Schneider and I wrote. I think if you read anything you should read anything you can find by Joel Schneider. The guy is brilliant. We make a good tag team because I'm a different type of thinker and he's a really, really sharp abstract integrators. Kind of the most official update of CHC theory. Can you still hear me? I saw unstable notice again.
It's okay. It's somewhat blurry sometimes, but it's really okay.
Okay, and you'll get these slides, so you can fill in the gaps. So I'm just going to quickly. So this is kind of the standard way you see CHC represented with G at the top and the broad abilities here. And these are tentative ones that, if you read in the chapter, that have kind of tentative membership in the CHC taxonomy. They're not as well established and they need more validation. And one point I want to make here, that the whole idea that there is psychometric G or statistical G, but we don't know that it relates to anything related to any known brain mechanism. So there's a lot of conflation of theoretical and psychometric G in literature, and most people ignore it. And we're working on a paper right now to make sure, to kind of slap people across the face, including myself, saying, you know, we've been assuming that whenever we find psychometric G in a battery of tests, that relates to some brain entity, and we don't know that yet. And these are the major definitions, and I'm not going to go through them all, but you'll get these nifty slides that move. And these are the tentative ones that are often excluded from figures. So if you read that chapter, this is the big picture. There's G, possibly psychometric G, but we're not sure it's a theoretical entity. These broad abilities, and these are the ones that are in most intelligence tests. We know that these abilities have those 5 different sources of validity evidence. We don't have that for G. We got structural evidence for G, but and some heritability, but that's about it. And these are the narrow abilities, and they're all, these are the codes. And this is not in the book of this figure, but you'll have access to it through my slides. And there's the broad. Joel and I believe that there's some intermediate abilities that are broader than the narrow specialized ability, but not as broad as this. And I had frequent conversations with John Carroll before he passed away, that he said his thing about broad and narrow in general was very arbitrary. And he said, some of these things could move around no matter what, it's the best I could do. So we think these are, and he would approve of these, we think. Now, this is about where I'm going to stop on the factor and CHC. I'm just going to show you that for each CHC ability, I provide you a slide of the definitions that are abstracted from that chapter, that inductive and deductive reasoning, figuring things out. And then that also show you the I don't want to, because I think it's not all that exciting, and I think you guys can read. You guys can go find all this stuff in those slides, because they just keep going like this. So I would like to stop right there, because that's a brief overview of factor theories, the CHC model, the abilities. You've got it in that chapter, and now you got some slides to help you integrate that knowledge, and maybe take any questions on anything up to this point, because then I'd like to move to the really exciting, sexy stuff. So what do you think, Nicholas? Anybody any questions at this point? And then how much time do we have now?
We got about 35 minutes running. So you have another 30 minutes or 35 minutes. I don't know if you want to talk longer.
Well, why don't why don't we, instead of getting sidetracked here with questions on this?
Yeah,
I really want to give you the new stuff.
Yep.
Okay. Does this kind of make sense? Kind of
Absolutely. For me, absolutely. And I think for my students, because we talked about Spearman, Thurston, Cattell, and Horn, the sessions before, so they should get a good grasp of what you talked about.
Yep. And the idea is just listen, get the big concepts, and then read and put this all together afterwards with the slides. So but I would really like to just move to the next stuff, in fact, let me just get out of this module.
So we're only turning off our videos because that limits the bandwidth. And
okay, I'll put.
So are we ready to?
Yeah, we're ready.
Okay, and I can talk longer if you want, but what I think is more important is factor analysis has taken us to a certain point. We now have this kind of taxonomy, and there are other scholars who are writing about this. Most of them are right in the premier intelligence journals and not in the assessment journals. I think we've reached the plateau. I'm kind of tired of factor analysis. We're not going to identify a lot of new broad ability. We might find some new special narrow abilities. It's kind of like, I don't want to waste my time much doing that anymore, because I think let other people do that. We kind of got the taxonomy. We know where the tentative other new abilities are. We'll probably find some others around here and there. But I think what is more important, these are the slides I was working on when I got your urgent email that we got to get going. So there might be some issues here. I'm not sure. So this is where we are with CC. And the important point, and this was the thing I was just adding when you got a hold of me, that this is a robust description. And when you talk about theories, a big important function of a theory is to describe. CHC is in fact analysis have done an excellent job of giving us a description and a working taxonomy of human cognitive abilities. However, and this is criticism by others, and it's a very valid criticism, it does not explain why. What are the causal mechanisms of intellectual performance? How do these abilities relate to each other and interact? So this is a very static, linear, and that's why when I put that first slide up, that's what this is. It's A and B. It really doesn't explain what's going on in the brain or what we think. And Joel Schneider and I have been puzzling about this probably for the last 8 years or so. And Joel and I, and some of these will be in your chapter, some will be in the 2012 chapter, and I can send that if you need it. Joel and I started to try, this is actually the work of Joel in a publication, where he said, well, in research, there are level abilities, John Carroll talks about that have to do with how well you can do something regardless of speed. And there are speed or fluency abilities down here. So this is just a reorganization. Those that are heavily dependent on controlled attention, which I'll get to a bit later, acquired knowledge, stuff that you store, and storage, how you get stuff learned into your storage system and retrieved.
I'm sorry, Kevin, but I think we are currently only seeing your PowerPoint screen, but we can't see it when you switch the slides. We see the PowerPoint screen, not the presentation.
Ooh. Okay. I know what's going on. I didn't. This is what I was working on before you called. I got to go to slideshow. Set up slideshow. Presented by individual at kiosk. Okay. Let me get out of this. Okay, I'll be there in a second.
Yeah. No problem.
Okay, new share. Ooh, so I gotta get these slides up now. Technology. What, you see my slides now?
No. I think it's the one monitor. You are using 2 monitors, isn't it? And we see the monitor.
No, I'm just using one monitor.
Okay.
I don't want that one. God damn it.
Okay, now it's away.
Okay.
It does something great. There we are.
Okay, yeah.
Now we can see it.
Well, that was because I was 2 different modules and they have different settings. I hadn't finished them. So, so you can see this now.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll go kind of move forward here. Here's the model, but like I said, it's a good description, factor analysis and CHC theory and all that psychometric stuff. It doesn't tell us the why or the causal mechanisms. And you can see that slide now, right?
Yeah, sorry, I had to unmute, but we can see it.
Okay, good. Okay, this is one of Joel's and primarily Joel in an article he did in 2015, where we basically see it, this is really kind of cool how you do this. Rearranging the CHC abilities to try and make more sense of how they might work together. So we got to categorize them. They're not just all this nice, neat little tidy taxonomy, that there are level abilities that have to do with how good you can do something without speed constraints, and speed abilities. And that's kind of a classic distinction in factor analysis in the CHC. And we've organized them as these are the motor abilities, these are perceptual, visual, and auditory, and other ones that have been found. Controlled attention, these are the abilities that are CHC abilities that are heavily dependent on controlled attention, which I'll feature later. These are acquired knowledge like crystallized, reading, math. And then there's learning efficiency and retrieval fluency, which are how do you get stuff into your long-term storage and get it out. That's one functional framework Joel and I were playing around with for a while. This is another one. So we were playing around with these. And this one is kind of getting closer to what some things that we're working on now is, and you can study this later, but the important thing is you can see that down here are parameters of cognitive efficiency. The memory abilities, the speed abilities, and also the larger rectangle shows that these are domain independent general abilities. They don't relate to a sensory or motor function. And that's where fluid intelligence is. So we played around with this one for a little while. It's just in terms of some thinking. And then, have you talked about Phil Ackerman's theory at all?
Not until now, at least for my students.
Okay. Well, he does most of his work with adults. But this is another conceptualization that takes CHC and organizes it primarily to Phil Ackerman's TPIK model. Intelligence is knowledge, acquired knowledge. Intelligence is process. These are cognitive processes. Intelligence is process, speed, and fluency. And then he doesn't talk about it, but physical competencies. And got a number of unpublished analyses that show that when we look at CHC measures, if you use stuff besides factor analysis, like multidimensional scaling and other procedures, this kind of shows up. So this is another interesting way to look at it. But I'm going to skip that. You can read that. What I want to do, this is where I'm trying to get, is information processing. What about if we're trying to get at the causality of how these things relate and work together to make a person appear intelligent in a setting, or why they might achieve in reading and math or not? We need to move down that hierarchy. So let's go down to the mechanical information processing models. And Joel and I have been working on this, and we've actually been testing some of these models. We just haven't gotten time to put them out there yet. That if you rearrange, and this is kind of like the Van Gogh of slides that I put together, that if you use information processing at environmental input, sensory and perceptual abilities like visual, spatial, auditory, and some other ones, attention and speed are involved. That gets things into working memory, and I'll come back and talk about these. And then long-term GL, or learning efficiency, gets things down into your cloud of storage, like your iCloud, your knowledge base, GC, writing, math, domain-specific knowledge. GR is retrieval, and then speed also is involved in when you perform. Psychomotor speed is involved when you do motor performance. But the key here is that in the middle is working memory is not really the same thing. It's not really an individual difference construct. It's more of a functional construct. And if you really read the research on it, working memory and how it relates to psychometric models of intelligence, this is kind of like the bottleneck of learning. And focused attention or attentional control is very important to do working memory. Everything, as you can see, passes through working memory. And that's why it's kind of the bottleneck. And that's why there's a lot of research that shows working memory is strongly associated with GF, but it's not isomorphic with it. But fluid reasoning only can occur within the context of working memory. So this is the model that Joel and I have been looking at in terms of if we're trying to understand how these CHC abilities relate to each other, which might help with interpretation and diagnosis and intervention, this is a possibility. I'm going to skip that. And here's some unpublished. You see it says Madam Schneider McGrew 20 ? Actually, this is Joel's work. It's not mine. He just put my name on there because we were doing a presentation together one day. He's been analyzing stuff from the Wechslers, the Kaufman battery, the Woodcock-Johnson 3, and the WJ4 using structural equation modeling to try to show how do these CHC abilities, is there a causal mechanism path based on theory and what the modeling tells us, and the darker lines are the ones that seem to be robust. You can see GS influences working memory. That's called the developmental cascade model, which impacts GF, and GF is invested through investment mechanisms to produce GC acquired knowledge. That's Catel's investment hypothesis. And there are all kinds of numbers here. This is, I keep bugging Joel, but when are we going to publish this? But it's basically, we're trying to get to, we now got the CHC building blocks, but how do they relate to each other? And some of the dotted and less observable lines don't really validate, so we suggest the model is not quite correct, but it's across massive data sets, national norm samples from all the tests. We're trying to work on that. So that's what we're kind of trying to see if we can validate some version of this model. Now, the relations between cognitive abilities with an eye towards intervention, because the CHC taxonomy is criticized, and CHC tests are criticized as, yes, you are validly, well, there are a few that disagree with this. Yes, you are validly measuring these broad abilities, but they don't really lead direct to interventions. And I say, yes, you're probably right, because we don't have the causal mechanisms understood. So that's why we need to be doing this other kind of research. And this is where the psychometric network analysis is coming into. And this is, I just want to show you the results from this analysis, which Joel Ocon-Boulette, Scott Decker, and I have been working on for the last year, and the manuscript's about ready to be submitted. And the idea is, I don't know if you've seen the psychometric network thing, but it doesn't deal with factors, it deals with the measures, but it identifies communities of tests that hang together, like these, all the same color are all working memory tests. These are all the GC tests. These are all the GF. So it finds the same dimensions, but it doesn't have a general intelligence factor in the way. And all these arrows show that all the relationships between them all. It's well beyond 2 dimensions, it's multi-dimensional space. And the idea is that, and this is just something I grabbed off the internet. The idea is that, and this comes from primarily from psychopathology and mental illness research, especially by Vandermoss and, what's the other guy's name? He's so good. I'm forgetting it right now. That if you know these paths, and it only identifies the significant paths, that are salient, then you can go in. The idea is, if you know the paths, you can go in and do what are called in silico simulations. If you've got a validated model, then you can go in and say, you know what? This test here, oral comprehension, verbal attention, the ones with the black dots, retrieval fluency, and letter padding are the most central nodes. There's metrics that come out to say the central nodes, that if you change those, there'll be a ripple effect through the network. And therefore, you can do mathematical simulations to say, if we can go in and improve a person's working memory as measured by this, what's it going to do to the entire network of intellectual functioning? And then eventually you can add in achievement measures into these analyses. So this is, you can't do this with really factor analysis. You can do structural equation modeling, but you can go in and say, let's play with this parameter. Let's see if we increase this central node or decrease this central node. What's it going to do to everything else? So you can do all these in simulations that might help you identify the causal mechanisms. And that's, I think, is really exciting about the psychometric network analysis research. So I'm just going to give you a little tease of what we're finding. And this is the paper we're working on. It's a manuscript that's in preparation. We're still kind of working on it. We're getting near the end. And it's briefly, it's done with the Woodcock-Johnson norm data, selected the best CHC measures. I'm not going to go through all of these. And the goal was not to select just the Woodcock test measures because I'm a Woodcock author, that are the ones that are feature tests, but what are the best indicators of CHC abilities as we know it? And so we selected the best operational set for the model of CHC, not for the model of the Woodcock-Johnson. And those are the subtests. I'm not going to talk about them. And then what I said before is we excluded a couple of tests because of they didn't meet the criteria, but oral comp, retrieval fluency, verbal attention, and letter pattern matching were the most central nodes. And these numbers here, as you can see, the thickness of the lines, that kind of corresponds to almost like a correlation. That's the weight. General information is highly related to oral vocab. They've got a strong weight. And basically, just think about general intelligence. The psychometric G has been purged of all of this. That's why the weights are large. But these are big weights in psychometric network analysis. So you can see that this is a robust domain. This is a robust domain. This is a very robust domain. This is a robust. All the primary CHC abilities that were included in the network analysis are found just as they were in factor analysis. So it's kind of like here's an alternative method without general intelligence saying us that these abilities hang together. They are these kind of measures. You get all kinds of centrality metrics that is new to most people, and I'm not going to go through them, but the important thing is since this is really hard, this is multidimensional space, you'd supplement it with a lower dimensional procedure. And, I'm actually going to skip by these slides. No, I'm not. They're too cool. Called because there's only about 12 people, 15 of the people have seen these results so far. It's hard to really interpret because what you think you see in them is not what really is going on sometimes. Most central measures may not be in the center, for example. So it's recommended multidimensional scaling, and these are all the tests, and it's called Gutman-Radix model. It's a different way of looking at the structure and dimensionality of stuff. And what you do is then you use what's called a minimal spanning tree. You connect the dots together, the tests together, in the order that makes the least distance if you had to traverse through all the points. And what you want to see, if you're validating your model, the GS tests hang together first. And then that things connect as communities. So there's the speeded test from the Woodcock. They connect as a community. These are the retrieval fluency. How fast can you name as many animals as you can in a minute? So it's kind of speeded and fluency. They are a distinct dimension. Then there's the working memory dimension. I know you don't know these tests, but just trust me, these are the working memory tests. These are the GC tests. These are the auditory processing tests. These are the fluid reasoning tests. And these are the visual spatial tests. The beauty of this figure is all the tests that hang together, that should be theoretically hanging together, there's not any crisscrossing or things getting out of sequence. So these domains are, again, validated and such. But there's also some interesting unintended findings that we came up with. I'm going to skip this one. And I don't have, since you don't know the test, I'm going to give them to you. If you go across the dimension at the bottom and look from the test from this side, these are speeded tests and fluency tests to those this side. And I've seen this before, so I was looking for it. These measures, this are more system one automatic cognitive processes. I don't know if you've read Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow. These are more slow, controlled, deliberate cognitive processes on this side. This dimension, visual spatial, geometric, visual spatial, geometric design, images, numbers, and such. Down here, you get into language and such. And so this dimension is Ackerman's intelligence as process, or Catel's GF, going back to his two-part theory, to product dominant, more culturally loaded Catel's GC. So it's telling us that if we get beyond the CHC taxonomy, there might be some higher order or kind of underlying cognitive dimensions from other areas of psychology that are important for understanding these abilities and measures of these abilities, which I think is really exciting. So now, exciting conclusion. What we're trying to do with this is look at, we're playing around with these, and we've got some work in process there. We've done this. Now we're trying to marry these two. How can the psychometric network analysis inform us of information processing? But back up a bit, the psychometric analysis says that if you take G out of the equation, you still get these dimensions. You guys don't know the WJ4 probably, so I'm not going to talk about that slide. I'm not going to go through this is a presentation for another group. I'm not going to go through the implications of methodology of P&A because that's another rabbit hole we don't have time for. Yeah. But I think what we found is that there may be some intermediate cognitive ability or processing dimensions. System 1 versus system 2, which comes from cognitive sciences. Catel's GFG continuum may hold some water that we've probably ignored and should get back to. And maybe there's not a G up there, but there might be a GF and a GC. That cognitive processing efficiency or attentional control may be the most important part. What we're finding in that, I put this slide together just yesterday. If you look, here are the parameters of cognitive efficiency. Here's the network. I'm going to take the biggest central nodes. If you map them, one's a measure of processing speed. This is a measure of working memory, and this is a measure of retrieval fluency. These are not highlighted because we didn't have measures of them in the analysis, but these are parameters of cognitive efficiency. Oral comprehension is a complex measure that it seems to also require working memory, retrieval fluency, but a bit of GF and GC. So we're just right now struggling with, I think what this is telling us, which really is exciting to me. And I think I'm gonna just go through the rest of the slides. The primary network analysis and the information processing stuff that we're doing is hopefully moving us to the next step of saying, okay, we got these nice taxonomies of CHC. We got some good measures out there. How do they relate? And if you go in and move this one, you tweak this, what's it going to do to the rest? So it might give us some hope for where to intervene or where, and the intervention doesn't have to necessarily mean cognitive training. It may mean if somebody's really deficit in working memory, we might be able to give them some brain training software stuff, which is somewhat controversial, but maybe we need to work around that node, you know, and do the in silico simulation saying, you know, we can't change that. Research shows we can't change. Well, what happens if we just kind of work around it? So I think what we're trying to do is move things into what's going on, and our current study suggests that the most important thing is the bottleneck, the working memory, executive function, attentional control complex. And that is featured heavily in some modern theories of intelligence called the process overlap theory and dynamic mutualism, which a lot of people are not aware of if you don't read the stuff in the intelligence journals. So that's kind of what I wanted to share is we know where we've been with, we're kind of at, I think, the culmination of factor theories really giving us much more new information. We need to really figure out what's going on with the interaction of these abilities. And we've got some really good people with some really good theories, which have been supported by some significant research and related to brain networks. And one's called process overlap theory by Kovacs and Conway, or Conway and Kovacs. Dynamic mutualism, which is the Vandermaas, what's the other guy's name? They're so good. Borsboom, the Netherlands group. There's the wired intelligence theory, and there's an attentional control theory primarily by Engel. But those theories seem to be the most relevant and most consistent with our data, saying this is where we as intelligence scholars and people need to be working and people need to be doing dissertations. You can go ahead and do a factor analysis dissertation. That's good because a good dissertation is a done dissertation. But I would encourage you to start digging more into psychometric network analysis. So I'm going to stop talking and
great. Thank you very much for this excellent talk. I really had fun listening to you. And before maybe I and or Matthias and I ask some questions, I would encourage the students to ask Kevin if there is something you want to ask him. Now's your opportunity. Or otherwise, we could ask a question and the students can write in the chat. No.
Well, yeah, I don't want to put the chat screen open. It distracts me. So if you could just, if there's some questions coming through there, why don't you read them to me?
Yeah, we'll monitor the chat and if necessary translate.
Ja.
Also Sie können es auch auf Deutsch schreiben und wir übersetzen es dann für Sie als speziellen Service. As said, they can write it in German and we translate it as a special service. But when I saw this network stuff, it reminded me of Marshall-Lake, Lohman, and Snow, and I think this is what the Radix model essentially was. Or
yes, in fact, I've been doing multidimensional scaling for like 20 years. I think it's one of the most underutilized, unappreciated thing because everybody fell in love with literal structural equation modeling. I call it Yorskog syndrome because Yorskog was the guy who started this. And Snow, Marshall-Lake, and Lohman, classic work on multidimensional scaling. Tucker Draub and Salthouse have done some excellent stuff. That seems to be ignored by people in assessment. And I don't understand, but psychometric, and I've loved visual representations of data. And multidimensional scaling gives you, I went over the fact that the things at the middle are the most cognitively complex, but it gives you a visual way to look at how things relate. And P&A is like multidimensional scaling on steroids.
Multidimensional scaling on steroids is a nice expression.
That would be a great paper title. Let me also thank you very much for the presentation. Sorry, Nicholas, you wanted to add something?
No, what I wanted to say, the interesting thing is that I always, for the talk, I thought, how can you test this empirically? And you answered it in the last part because we can say if there is a node and the person is low on this node, we can find a way to work around it. And by experimentally manipulating that, we would have a hypothesis of how he should perform afterwards.
Yeah. In fact, that's a problem with doing intervention research. Is you got to go out and get people, do interventions, and then after you're done, you go, oh, it didn't work. This allows you to do this in silico or data simulations ahead of time. That this might work. This might rifle through. So now let's go try it. And you can do all. Now we're not at the stage there. In fact, in our article we write that group can't do it. We need to get together with these P&A people who do the simulations to start doing it. But I think it's a next step is to let's do some simulations. And it's like you said, it's not an ability training to change a node. In fact, I use a model called the MARC model: modification, accommodations, remediation, and compensation. It's from Jennifer Moscalo. But there's 4 different ways you can maybe work with a node. It's going to be very, very complex research, but I think somebody needs to do it.
Definitely, but this when you do factor analysis, you don't have the hypothesis. So every time you do the factor analysis, it says, "Oh, it's this model," and you can make a hierarchical model with G at the top. You can do a bifactor model, and every time you get a model to run, but the thing which makes this network analysis rather sexy is to say, if we move this and this aspect, the other aspects will move in this way.
Yeah, and talking about the bifactor and the other one, there's basically a pissing contest going on now between the two groups right now. My model's better than your model. Yeah. And the problem with it with both of the groups is it's primarily groups. I'm not talking about the really serious intelligence scholars that are intelligent. Yeah. It's the school psychology groups. And it's Keith Reynolds, who are some of my best friends, and there's the Canavez et al. Group, and they're basically going back and forth. And all of their stuff is it's all so statistical, and they don't integrate theory. And all things are pointing us to the fact, yeah, psychometric G is the most robust phenomenon probably in psychology, and it's the best predictor in psychology. But it's a statistical abstraction. We have no underlying brain network. Brain mechanism or anything that says it exists. I call it the Loch Ness monster of psychology.
And
it's in the way.
This was what one student asked if it will be possible at some time to look at brain activity alone to determine intelligence without testing.
There are some people that I know and communicate with in the intelligence world, especially those in the ISIR group, who are looking for neuro-G. And Richard Hayer is well respected, and he firmly believes we need to find neuro-G, because if we can find, there are people looking for it. I think it's way out there. I think it's way out there in terms of I won't see it in my lifetime. But yeah, there's the possibility that if the techniques get so good enough, but right now, no. But down the road, it's possible.
Yeah, not neuro-G, but what Marco Koch, a colleague of mine, wrote was something like analyzing all kind of data, like data mining with artificial intelligence to predict intelligence. So what these Cambridge Analytica guys did, no? And this might also deliver some information on how it works. So what in the personal data makes us intelligence, but that there is a neuro plug-in which you put in the head, like Elon Musk wants to do it. I don't. That's what he writes. It's really scary.
And my current, looking at all the literature I've looked at, I just read nonstop on this stuff, and I can't understand half of it, but I force myself to learn it. And the stuff I'm doing is suggesting that we need to be looking at the working memory, and in particular, the construct of attentional control. It might be one of the more key, not the key element, but one of the most important, because that involves the interaction of three really critical networks in the brain. The default brain network is mind wandering. You let your mind kind of go. There's the central executive network, which is the frontal parietal, the PFIT model that I got to engage, I got to think and such. And then there's the salience network, which is the air traffic control system saying, shut down mind wandering, get this going. And the interplay between them has to do with how good you can focus and control your focus to work on complex problems. That's where Engel's work in particular on attentional control, and some good stuff on mind wandering and such, all relates and says, maybe we got to be really looking at that kind of construct. Attentional control is one of the keys. And where those things are in the brain, at least we kind of know what some of the networks are.
Yeah.
There's also another interesting question from the chat. That is whether you think that the network model might offer to measure intelligence in a more inclusive way, with less social, let's say, less effect of social inequality.
Somebody must have read the same article I did. There was just an article in the Journal of Intelligence, not in Intelligence, and I can't remember the authors. I should know it. And it was like an epiphany went off to me. And it was two women, and one of them was, a person of color, and they were saying intelligence is important for us to help with equity issues if we use the right model of intelligence. And the short story is the psychometric model with G at the top is a dead end. Because if you think a G is something that causes everything, good luck. We don't know what it is yet. And we've never had any interventions that even move the needle on psychometric G. And they were saying, if you look at these new network models, and in particular, the process overlap theory, there's a thing called stereotype threats that a lot of people who are marginalized groups, people of color, women in mathematics and science, at least in the United States and such, older folks, that if a person feels they're in a performance or testing situation where they might fit a stereotype that says you're not supposed to do well, it impacts working memory. And it also impacts controlled, deliberate processing on that. One thing I showed, fast versus slow. And if you look at the process overlap theory, they say that the central thing that is the bottleneck. And their article just came out, and I think it's very profound. They're saying these are areas that seem to be sensitive to stereotype threat from marginalized groups. And with a process overlap theory approach and network stuff, now maybe we should look at this theory seriously to figure out how to threat and help us. I can't do well in this task because I'm the only one of my color in this group in this class. And they're saying if you have the right theory, like process overlap, and get rid of G, it might help with social justice and equity issues. I mean, I read that and I was like, trying to get my head around it right now, but I think it's got the potential to, because we're not going to change whatever G might be. We can do stuff with working memory probably, and attentional control. In fact, I know we can do stuff with attentional control. It just does it maintain long-term. And there's like focused attention, meditation, mindfulness. It's kind of like a whole, so that's a very excellent question.
I think so too. We're currently thinking a lot about this bottleneck that you were talking about in the terms of cognitive load theory from Sweller in a long time ago.
It all comes together.
Yeah, it really makes a lot of sense to me that problem solving or solving intelligence tasks is limited by working memory capacity or knowledge. If you have enough knowledge, then you probably won't need your working memory as hard.
But the working bottleneck is, there are these two arrows going down to your knowledge, one to get it in and one to get it out. And the retrieval fluency one, so that's, everything's got to go through there, and all your reasoning's got to go in there. And I can give you a personal story. I don't like to use personal anecdotes because people don't think you're scientific.
No, that's great. That's great.
No, I was deathly ill from November 2018 to February 2019 in the Mayo Clinic in intensive care for 82 days. Basically coded blue, in a coma for 6 weeks. I came out with PICS, post-intensive care syndrome, which is you're not using your brain. Let me tell you, it took me like 45 minutes to write my first email because I couldn't control my working memory. Mm-hmm. I couldn't focus. And then a clinician who I was seeing gave me 2 of my own tests, analysis, synthesis, and concept formation. Says, I just want to see how you do on them. I've been working with these tests for 40 some years. After the harder ones, I could not do them, although I knew the underlying principles, because my cognitive efficiency, working memory, attentional complex was so impaired. It was scary, but I can see why, that's what's really important, because I've lost it. And if you don't have it, it's like, ooh, yeah.
Scary, but also a nice validation of your tests. Not even easy to cheat on if you know the answers.
It was very frustrating, but I knew what was going on, so I said, okay, yeah, I know what's going on. I just can't think right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, and introspection is important there. So I just developed some mental rotation tasks, which I believe that they assess or provide good information or good proxy of mental rotation ability. And you can see or you can feel when you start to rotate them mentally, or when you start doing some reasoning thing. And this is a common critique for the mental rotation items, that you can solve them without mentally rotating them. But if you have some molecule structures that are presented in another way, and you have to think how are they rotated, then you can feel how they rotate. And this is we said, or it seems like these tests are giving or factor analyzing these tests is something that is not as good as a network analysis. But I don't think that this is, you said it's a pissing contest, this or this, but it's not a pissing contest. So you can feel, or you can, by doing the tests, you can understand what G really is. So if you do a test and you think I have to do this and this, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Back to the work that you're doing all this stuff within your working memory and using visual working memory, and moving things around. That's the central bottleneck of the human brain, I think. And at least that's my opinion. In
the chat, the two two guys that asked you said that it was interesting, and thank you very much. And there's another question. Frau Rexin or Miss Rexin asks, being multilingual or musical is said to have a huge impact on intelligence and development. How is that? Besides their obvious influence on lexical and rhythm abilities, do they have impacts on working memory ability as well?
Oh, I just got a warning, my battery's low. I thought it was plugged in. Or somebody else, that's your computer, I think. Well, my battery's unplugged in, so whoever's boring that was, it wasn't me.
Okay.
One of you is gonna go dead here in a minute. I've seen a lot of literature, but I haven't really studied it because I just don't have the bandwidth that suggests. Although I've seen some stuff recently, things countering it. So you always get that people who are bilingual tend to be more intelligent. Being that are higher. I don't know if it's what's the cause and the effect, but being bilingual seems to make people more intelligent, or allow them to perform more intelligently. I make a distinction between intelligence, kind of like with the raw material, and your performance. And your performance can fluctuate all the time. So I think, and there's stuff. I was into it for quite a while. I was working with a company called Interactive Metronome, that musical abilities and rhythmic processing and such does seem to have an enhancing effect on intelligence. Also, I did do a deep dive into it for a while, but I've lost track of it. It seems to be, I was iterating towards, Jensen talks about reaction time G as the essence of intelligence. Well, Ramsayer, I think he's from Germany. Thomas Ramsayer has published some excellent research on temporal processing in temporal G. Mm-hmm. Temporal G, which has to do with the resolution of your brain clock or multiple brain clocks, had a stronger association with psychometric Gs than Jensen's did, quite a bit. So there seemed to be something about musical abilities, rhythmic abilities, and/or programs that train you to be more rhythmic might help your brain clock have more resolution, more fine ticks on it. That's the best I could come up with. But I've left that literature for about the last 10 years and haven't gotten back into it.
The only thing I know is that measures of musicality and measures of intelligence are intercorrelated, but not very strong. I think the correlation was about 0.20 for playing an instrument, or quality of playing an instrument and intelligence. It's not that strong, but what you say, if your mental clock is more precise, this is also a good functioning of the cognitive apparatus, and fits well within the network theory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This could be a node, maybe.
Yeah, and I wish we had some measures of temporal processing in our tests, but we don't. I mean, we're talking about they're measuring stuff in milliseconds. It's not just, it's like tapping beats and responding within milliseconds, the technology I've seen. So it's a different kind of ballgame there.
So there's another question in the chat, and Mrs. Meyer or Miss Meyer says, thank you for the nice and engaging presentation. And she wrote, it seems to me that the P&A model allows for more individuality and making it all the easier to visualize the differences by decreasing the node strength. What's your take on focusing on more individuality and less on standardized test models factors?
Yes. In fact, there's a bunch of discussions going on. The psychometric network analysis stuff, the real people are really doing it are in psychopathology, because they're looking at symptom networks. And there's, it's literature I just can't keep up with, but they're talking about idiographic networks. And I have no idea how they're going to get individual person networks. But they're talking about it and how some methodologies might be possible. I think, that's the whole thing about factor analysis, psychometric network analysis. It's all group-based data. And we know one thing, there's this principle in philosophy and psychology called the principle of ergodicity. The principle of ergodicity has to do with how, if a process is ergodic, it's in the population in general, and also is present in the individual. Almost all psychological processes we know right now are non-ergodic. We do a factor analysis and get a nice model, or we get a network model, it's a nice model, but that's based on the population, and there'll be people who have different signatures that are not structured that way. And that's been that's a big problem in respect to the old Cronbach distinction between the two, experimental psychology for
Ich hoffe, jetzt ist nicht seine Batterie abgeschmiert.
Nee, ich glaube nicht. Der sagt, er ist eingestellt.
Kevin, if you can hear us, we can't hear you anymore. Ja, also gut, ich meine, 1945 wollten wir ja eigentlich auch Schluss machen. Also ich glaube, wenn er jetzt ist er rausgeflogen. Vielleicht kommt er noch mal. Ist so ein bisschen unromantisch jetzt, wenn wir es beenden, ohne uns noch mal bei ihm zu bedanken.
Das stimmt. Das müssen wir vielleicht so machen.
Gut, aber ich würde dann sagen, dann beenden wir es hier. Also wenn es noch im Chat Fragen gibt, also wenn Sie noch irgendwie Fragen haben, dann melden Sie sich gerne. Ja, ansonsten hoffe ich, dass es Ihnen was gebracht hat. Also ich fand es ziemlich cool.
Ja, also ich auch. Sie haben jetzt eventuell einen Eindruck, was sozusagen ganz aktuell diskutiert wird in der Intelligenzforschung. Vielleicht war es für manche, zumindest von meinen Studierenden, ein bisschen ein Sprung, der vielleicht eine Promotion übersprungen hat. Das ist schön. Das ist jetzt mal wirklich ein realistischer Eindruck, wie aktuelle wissenschaftliche Diskussionen aussehen.
Ja, klar. Ne? Also ich meine, bei mir sind die jetzt dann halt im 2. Semester Bachelor, aber ich finde es dann halt immer wichtig, dass man auch noch mal quasi nach vorne schon mal gucken kann. Ne? Und also was ja natürlich wirklich attraktiv ist an diesen Network-Modellen, ist, dass man die halt so gut visualisieren kann, ne? Wie er jetzt halt eben auch gesagt hat. Ich finde das halt, wenn du sagst, okay, die sind halt näher beieinander und deswegen haben die mehr miteinander zu tun, so ein bisschen intuitiver, als wenn du halt eben so eine Faktorladungsmatrix oder halt so ein Strukturgleichungsmodell halt eben siehst.
Auf jeden Fall.
Aber so quasi von zwei Seiten halt eben auf die gleiche Sache geguckt. Das war das, glaube ich, was er am Ende dann auch nochmal sagen wollte, dass also du kannst faktoriell drauf gucken oder mit so einer multidimensionalen Network-Geschichte, aber es sind die gleichen Korrelationen halt. Also alles basiert nachher auf Korrelationen zwischen Intelligenztests und dann eben so der Weg raus, wo man dann sagt, was können wir da für die Realität jetzt halt vorhersagen, die ist halt nochmal wichtig. Ne? Ja, ist das der aktuellste Ansatz in der Intelligenzforschung? Matthias, ich hoffe, du hast jetzt nicht die ganzen Studis gerickrollt.
Das
wäre der Mega-Move. Das wäre der Mega-Move.
Das wäre wirklich lustig, aber nein, ich habe ab und zu mal versucht, Paper mitzuteilen, die von ihm angesprochen wurden oder die irgendwie in die Richtung gehen. Sie können alle, falls Sie das alles nicht mitgeschrieben haben, bei den kleinen Punkten rechts bei mehr den ganzen Chatverlauf speichern. Dann haben Sie den als Text.
Also ich habe den auch aufgezeichnet. Also das kann ich halt auch mit bereitstellen. Und zwar jetzt nochmal gerade die Frage, ist das der aktuellste Ansatz in der Intelligenzforschung? Also was meinen Sie, die Netzwerkmodelle? Also die sind wir hatten es ja gesagt, das gab es schon früher mal. Also da in den 1980ern Marshalek, Lohman und Snow, das Radex-Modell, das hatten wir noch nicht besprochen, also zumindest in meiner Vorlesung, aber da mache ich dann sicherlich fürs nächste Mal eine Slide zu, wenn man das hat, aber würde ich sagen, ist halt so eine Strömung, die über die klassische, also die Hauptströmung ist sicherlich halt eben die hierarchischen Modelle, die er am Anfang gezeigt hat, also CHC-Modell, das wäre das aktuellste und was er dann ja sagt, eben so, jetzt wissen wir, wie man das aufteilen kann, so das Intelligenzkonstrukt in verschiedene Subkonstrukte. Und jetzt geht es halt eben darum, wie funktionieren die oder wie interagieren die halt eben miteinander. Mhm. Und was er dann eben auch nochmal gesagt hat, also von dem Christoph Kovac, ne? Process Overlap Theory, das kennst du auch, Matthias, ne?
Ja.
Das ist halt eben nochmal so ein Ansatz, also ganz interessant, weil der quasi G halt eben erklären kann ohne G. Ne? Also durch überlappende unterschiedliche Prozesse, die dann halt eben dazu führen, dass Intelligenztests halt miteinander korrelieren, aber nur weil die halt eben verschiedene Prozesse teilen, aber nicht den gleichen einen Prozess, der halt eben G ist. Also da wollte ich in der Vorlesung auf jeden Fall noch was drüber erzählen, weil ich da sagen würde, das ist jetzt auch nochmal sowas, das hatte ich vorher noch nicht gesehen. Halt. Es
gibt diese wirklich coolen Arbeiten von Sternberg aus den späten 90ern, wo er versucht hat zu zeigen, dass G auch ein bisschen ein Artefakt unserer Schulbildung ist, die sozusagen gemeinsame Prozesse produziert hat, weil wir in der Schule das gemeinsam gelernt haben. Und er ist dann nach Kenia gefahren und hat sozusagen westlich schulgebildete Kinder verglichen mit nicht westlich schulgebildeten Kindern und bei den nicht westlichen noch keinen G-Faktor gefunden, sondern sehr isolierte Einzelkompetenzen.
Kevin hat mir gerade geschrieben, I think the Internet Zoom gods decided we had taken up enough bandwidth for today. Also er ist schon echt ein Scherzkeks, the K-Dizzle. Aber gut, also danke jetzt nochmal für die Feedbacks da aus dem Chat. Das freut mich, wenn das Ihnen was geholfen hat, zumindest auf Selbstzweck hinaus. Wie ist nochmal der Forscher mit dem Neuro-G?
Da bin ich mir gerade auch nicht sicher, wen er gemeint hat. Es gibt ja Arbeiten aus Deutschland, also aus Berlin, die das machen.
Van der Maas, ne? Oder? War das
genau, das
war
die
diese Van der Maas-Gruppe, ne? Boomsma, ist das die, jetzt komme ich auch nicht auf den Namen, ist das die Nicole Boomsma?
Die hat er auf jeden Fall heute mal erwähnt.
Also HL van der Maas oder HL van der Maaßen, das war auch in der Presentation halt eben drin. Die schiebe ich dann, also die stellen wir beide auch nochmal bereit dann für alle. Supi, cool, dann danke für Ihre Aufmerksamkeit, danke auch, dass Sie so schön gefragt haben und dann einen schönen Abend und wir sehen uns, in Greifswald sehen wir uns dann halt nächsten Dienstag oder dann Donnerstag in der Woche, weil das ist ja noch Christi Himmelfahrt.
Falls noch Aachener da sind, wir sehen uns nächste Woche Mittwoch. Ja.
Alles klar. Dann schönen Abend. Bis dann.
Schönen
Tschüssi.
Abend. Tschüss.